That night, when my daughter said those words, I knew a mother's love could turn into the sharpest blade. My name is Regina Hayes. I'm 56 years old, and this is the story I kept silent for too long. Not because I was ashamed, but because some truths are too heavy to share until you've learned what they really mean. I raised my daughter alone. Her father left when she was 3, and from that day forward, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked double shifts at the hospital, first as a nurse's aide, then as a registered nurse, so she could have piano lessons, summer camps, and a college education without debt. I wanted her to have everything I never had. I wanted her to build a life where she'd never have to choose between paying rent and eating dinner. And she did. My Emily graduated summa cum laude, married a good man named David, and bought a beautiful house in the suburbs. White picket fence, blue shutters, the whole American dream I'd sewn together with my own tired hands. For years, I lived 3 hours away in my small apartment. I'd visit once a month, always bringing my old recipe book, the one with the torn cover and butter-stained pages. That book held every Sunday dinner, every birthday cake, every moment of love I'd translated into food. Emily used to say, "Mom, your chicken casserole tastes like home." Those words were enough to make every sacrifice worth it. But 6 months ago, Emily called me with tears in her voice. "Mom, I can't do this anymore. David's hours got cut and we're drowning. I'm so scared we'll lose the house." My heart broke for her. I didn't have much saved. Nurses don't get rich. But I had enough. Without telling her, I went to the bank and took out a personal loan for $23,000. It was almost everything I could borrow against my salary. The banker warned me about the interest rates, but I signed anyway. Mothers don't think about interest rates when their children are sinking. I transferred the money in 3 installments, telling her it was help from an old savings account. She cried with relief. "Mom, you saved us. We can finish paying off the house now. I don't know how to thank you." I told her what I always told her. "You don't need to thank me. You're my daughter. That's what love is." 3 weeks ago, she called again. This time, her voice was different, lighter, almost cheerful. "Mom, why don't you come stay with us for a while? You've been alone too long. Come next weekend. I miss you." Something about her tone felt strange, but I ignored it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I'd been a nurse too long and started diagnosing problems that weren't there. I packed my small suitcase, put my recipe book on top, just in case she wanted me to cook something special, and drove those 3 hours with hope blooming in my chest like spring flowers. When I arrived, Emily hugged me at the door. Her smile was perfect, too perfect, like a photograph that's been edited just a little too much. But I pushed the thought away and walked into her beautiful home, the one I'd helped save. "Mom," she said, squeezing my hand, "today you don't need to cook. I'm taking care of everything." I should have known right then. My daughter never took care of everything. Sometimes we trust people we shouldn't. Have you ever been disappointed by someone you loved? Tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. But that night, something happened that changed everything. I need you to understand something before I continue. My daughter wasn't always like this. The girl who would hurt me so deeply was once the child who held my hand through thunderstorms and said, "Mommy, I'll protect you." When Emily was 7 years old, she found my recipe book for the first time. It was a Saturday morning, and I was making pancakes. She climbed onto the kitchen counter, something I'd told her not to do 100 times, and pulled that old book down from the shelf. The pages were already worn back then, flower fingerprints on every corner. "Mommy, what's this?" she asked, her small fingers tracing the handwritten notes in the margins. "That's Grandma's handwriting," I told her, flipping to the page with the chicken casserole recipe. "She taught me how to make this when I was your age, and someday I'll teach you." Her eyes went wide. "Really? You'll teach me?" "Of course, sweetheart. This book is ours. It's how we tell each other we love each other, even when we can't find the words." She hugged that book to her chest like it was made of gold. From that day forward, every Sunday became our cooking day. I'd tie an apron around her waist. It was so big it wrapped around her twice. And she'd stand on a little stool next to me, measuring flour, cracking eggs, laughing when she got butter on her nose. Those were the golden years. The years when she still believed I knew everything. When my answers were gospel and my hugs could fix any problem. I worked night shifts so I could be home when she got off the school bus. I never missed a parent-teacher conference, never missed a school play, never let her feel the absence of a father who chose to disappear. Money was always tight. I remember the Christmas when she was 12. She wanted a new bike so badly, the kind all her friends had. I worked overtime for 3 months straight, saving every dollar I could squeeze from my paycheck. On Christmas morning, when she saw that bike with the purple streamers on the handlebars, she cried. Not because of the bike, but because she knew what it cost me. "Mom, you didn't have to do this," she whispered, her arms wrapped around my neck. "Yes, I did," I said, "because you're my everything." I meant it. God help me, I meant every word. When she went to college, I drove her there myself in my old sedan that made strange noises every time I turned left. We loaded her dorm room together, sheets I'd bought on sale, towels I'd embroidered with her initials, and a small copy of 3 recipes from my book that she'd asked me to write down for her. "Just in case I get homesick," she said with a shy smile. For the first 2 years, she called me every Sunday. We'd talk for hours about her classes, her new friends, her dreams of becoming a teacher. She'd tell me what she ate that week, and I'd laugh and say, "Ramen again? Baby, you need real food." Then I'd mail her care packages with homemade cookies and a handwritten note. "Remember, you're loved." When she met David during her junior year, she called me right away. "Mom, I think he's the one." I heard the joy in her voice, the kind of breathless excitement that only comes once in a lifetime. I wanted to protect that joy. I wanted her to have what I never did, a partner who stayed. The wedding was small, but perfect. I made the cake myself, a 3-tiered vanilla dream with buttercream roses. Emily cried when she saw it. "Mom, it's too beautiful to eat," she said, kissing my cheek. I'd spent 2 days making that cake. My hands cramped from piping all those tiny roses. But when I saw her face, none of it mattered. I stood in that church and watched my daughter marry a man who promised to love her forever. I wore the same dress I'd worn to my own wedding 28 years before. It still fit, barely, and I cried tears of gratitude. She's going to be happy, I thought. She's going to have everything I dreamed for her. When they bought the house, I helped them move in. I painted the guest bedroom myself, a soft yellow that reminded me of morning light. "This is your room, Mom," Emily said, squeezing my hand. "Anytime you want to visit, it's yours." I believed her. I believed every word. As I tell you this, I wonder where you're listening from. Write your city below so I can feel a little closer to you. But standing in her kitchen that night, watching her move around with that perfect smile, I realized something had shifted. The daughter who once held my hand through thunderstorms was gone, and I didn't know when I'd lost her. The dinner table was set like a magazine spread, white linen napkins folded into perfect triangles, candles flickering in crystal holders I didn't recognize, probably wedding gifts they'd never used before. The good china, the kind you only bring out for special occasions. "Mom, sit here," Emily said, pulling out a chair at the head of the table. Her smile was still there, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not really. I've spent 30 years reading faces in hospital rooms. You learn to see what people are hiding behind their smiles, and my daughter was hiding something. David came in from the living room. He kissed Emily on the cheek, but barely looked at me. "Hey, Regina," he said, his voice flat. Not rude exactly, just absent, like I was a piece of furniture he'd grown used to seeing. "Hi, sweetheart," I said anyway, because that's what mothers do. We pretend not to notice when we're being ignored. Emily disappeared into the kitchen and returned with plates of food. Roasted chicken with herbs, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans almondine. Everything looked beautiful, professional even. But when I took my first bite, I knew immediately, none of it was homemade. The chicken was from that expensive rotisserie place downtown. The potatoes had that telltale smoothness that only comes from a box. Even the green beans tasted like they'd been steamed in a restaurant kitchen. My daughter, who I'd taught to cook from scratch, who used to call me for advice on how to keep her pie crust from getting soggy, had ordered takeout and arranged it on fancy plates. "This is delicious, honey," I said, because what else could I say? But inside, something cold was spreading through my chest. "Thanks, Mom." She pushed her food around her plate, not really eating. David ate quickly, mechanically, like he wanted to be anywhere else. I tried to fill the silence with conversation. "How's work been, David? Emily mentioned they cut your hours." He glanced at Emily. She gave him a look I couldn't quite read. "Actually," he said slowly, "they restored my hours 3 months ago. I'm back to full time." The room went very quiet. 3 months ago. That was right after I'd sent the last installment of money. The money Emily said they desperately needed to save the house. "Oh," I said softly. That's wonderful. Emily, you didn't tell me." My daughter took a long sip of wine. "I guess it slipped my mind." Slipped her mind. $23,000, and their financial recovery had slipped her mind. I felt something crack inside me, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Just a hairline fracture, but it was there. I could feel it spreading. "Well, I'm glad things are better," I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking under the table. I folded them in my lap, the way I used to do during difficult conversations with doctors when I needed to appear calm, even though my heart was racing. Emily stood up suddenly. "I need to get something from the bedroom. I'll be right back." David and I sat in silence. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I watched him finish his chicken, watched him drain his glass of water, watched him check his phone twice. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Regina, I want you to know, this wasn't my idea." "What wasn't your idea?" But before he could answer, Emily came back into the room. She was holding a white envelope, the kind you use for formal occasions, weddings, graduations, resignations. Her hands were steady as she placed it in front of my plate, right next to my half-eaten dinner. "Mom," she said, and her voice had changed. It was the voice she used at parent-teacher conferences now, professional and distant. "We need to talk." I stared at that envelope. I didn't want to touch it. Some part of me knew that once I opened it, everything would change. The life I thought I'd built with my daughter, the relationship I'd sacrificed everything to maintain, would be over. "What is this?" I asked, even though I already knew. "You always know. Just open it." My fingers trembled as I picked up the envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. I opened it slowly, and the words hit me like a physical blow. "Mom, we've decided it's best if you return to your city. This house isn't big enough for 3 adults, and David and I need our privacy. We appreciate everything you've done, but it's time for you to live your own life. We've included bus fare for your trip home. We think it's better if you leave tomorrow morning." Clipped to the letter was $200 in cash. Bus fare. I looked up at my daughter. She was standing with her arms crossed, her face a mask I didn't recognize. This woman looked like Emily. Same brown eyes, same freckle on her left cheek, but she wasn't my daughter. She couldn't be. "Emily," I whispered, "what is this?" "It's what needs to happen, Mom. You've been alone too long. You need to go back home and build your own life instead of living through mine." Every word was a knife. I thought about the loan, the $23,000 I was still paying off, $47 a week for the next 8 years. I thought about the night shifts and the double shifts and the Christmas I worked instead of spending it with her because I needed the holiday pay. I thought about the recipe book sitting in my suitcase upstairs, the one I'd brought just in case she wanted to cook together like we used to. And I thought about something else, something I'd prepared before I came here, because a mother always knows when something's wrong, even when she doesn't want to admit it. I smiled. It was the saddest smile of my life, but I smiled anyway. "You're right, honey," I said quietly. I stood up, picked up my purse from the chair beside me, and reached inside. I do need to live my own life. And actually, I pulled out a manila envelope, much thicker than hers, much heavier. "I also prepared something for you." Emily's face went pale. David leaned forward in his chair. I placed the envelope on the table between us, right next to hers, and said the words I'd been practicing in my car for 3 hours. "I think you should open this before I leave." Emily stared at my envelope like it was a snake coiled on her dining room table. "Mom, what is that?" Her voice had that edge to it, the one she used when she was trying to sound in control but wasn't. I'd heard that voice before, when she was 16 and tried to convince me she hadn't been drinking at that party, when she was 22 and swore she'd paid her credit card bill on time, but hadn't. "Open it," I said quietly. "Then we'll talk." She didn't move. David shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. The candlelight made shadows dance across their faces, and for a moment, I felt like I was watching strangers, not my daughter and her husband. Just two people who'd invited me to dinner so they could hand me bus fare and tell me to disappear. Mom, I don't think— Open it, Emily. Something in my voice made her hands reach for the envelope. She unsealed it slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly. I watched her pull out the papers inside. There were 12 pages total. I knew because I'd printed them myself at the library 3 days ago, after that strange phone call when she'd invited me to visit. The first page was a bank statement. My bank statement. Highlighted in yellow were 3 wire transfers, each one marked with the date and amount. $7,000, $8,000, $8,000 again, all sent to Emily's account between March and May. She stared at it. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at David, then back at me. I don't understand, she said, but her voice was too high. She understood perfectly. Keep reading, I said. The second page was the loan agreement. Personal loan from First National Bank. $23,000 borrowed against my salary. Interest rate, 9.7%. Monthly payment, $204. Term, 8 years. I watched the color drain from Emily's face as she read the numbers. Her perfect composure was cracking like old paint. The third page, I continued calmly, is a printout of our text messages from March 11th. The day you called me crying, saying you and David were about to lose the house. The day you said you'd never ask me for money, but you were desperate. Do you remember what you said to me that night? Emily's hands were shaking now. She flipped to the third page. Her own words stared back at her. Mom, I'm so ashamed to ask, but if we don't pay $15,000 by next Friday, the bank will foreclose. I've failed. I've failed at everything. I don't know what to do. I don't want to lose our home. I don't want David to leave me. Below that, my response, baby, don't cry. I'll take care of it. You'll never lose your home. I promise. I remember, Emily whispered. A tear slid down her cheek, but I didn't know if it was shame or anger or something else entirely. The fourth page, I said, my voice steady, is David's employment record that I requested from his company's HR department. Public information, by the way. I just had to ask nicely. It shows that he never had his hours cut. Not once in the past 2 years. In fact, he received a promotion in February, 2 months before you told me you were drowning. David's face went red. Regina, I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Emily was flipping through the pages now, faster and faster. Page 5 was a screenshot of her Facebook post from April, the one where she'd shared photos of their vacation to Miami. 3-day weekend, beachfront hotel, cocktails at sunset. Posted 2 weeks after I'd sent the second wire transfer. Page 6 was a receipt from a jewelry store. A diamond tennis bracelet, $4,200, purchased April 22nd. The same bracelet she was wearing right now, glittering in the candlelight. Page 7 was another receipt. New furniture for their living room, $6,800, delivered May 5th. Page 8 was a credit card statement, not a bankruptcy notice. Not a foreclosure warning. A credit card with a balance of $3,000 and a credit limit of $15,000. Hardly the financial catastrophe she'd described. Emily's hands had stopped shaking. Now they were frozen, gripping those papers like they might disappear if she let go. When she finally looked up at me, her face was pale and hollow. Mom, she said, her voice breaking. I can explain. Can you? I asked. Can you explain why you lied to me? Why you made me believe you were losing everything when you were actually fine? Why you let me take out a loan I can barely afford so you could buy jewelry and furniture and take vacations? She opened her mouth, closed it. Tears were streaming down her face now, but I felt nothing. That cold place in my chest had spread until I was numb all over. I was going to pay you back, she whispered. I swear, Mom, I was going to— When? My voice was sharper than I intended. When were you going to pay me back? Before or after you handed me bus fare and told me to leave? David stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. Emily, tell her the truth. Shut up, David. No. His voice was loud now, angry. I'm done with this. Regina deserves the truth. Emily's face crumpled. She buried her face in her hands, and for a moment, She looked like the little girl who used to climb onto my lap when she was scared. But she wasn't a little girl anymore. She was a woman who'd lied to her mother and felt no remorse until she'd been caught. "My friends," she sobbed. "My friends all have nice things, nice houses, nice cars, nice clothes. I wanted to keep up. I wanted to feel like I was successful too. And you were always offering to help, always saying I just had to ask, and I thought you wouldn't mind. I thought you had more saved than you did. I didn't know you took out a loan. I swear, I didn't know. I felt something inside me break completely. Not crack, break, like a bone snapping under too much weight. You didn't ask," I said quietly. "You lied. You manipulated me. You made me believe my daughter was suffering so I would give you money you didn't need. And now you're kicking me out like I'm some burden you can't wait to be rid of. As I tell you this, I wonder where you're listening from. Write your city below so I can feel a little closer to you." "There's one more page," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Page 12. I think you should read it very carefully." Emily wiped her eyes and turned to the last page. Her face went from pale to gray. It was a legal document, a formal demand for repayment. Every dollar I'd sent her, plus the interest I would pay over 8 years. Total amount, $29,784. At the bottom, I'd written in my own handwriting, "You have 60 days to repay this amount, or I will pursue legal action. I loved you enough to give you everything. You loved me enough to throw me away. Now we're even." The silence in that room was deafening. Emily stared at that page, her whole body shaking. David had his hand over his mouth, his eyes wide. "Mom," Emily finally said, her voice breaking. "Please, I'm your daughter. You wouldn't." I picked up my purse. My hands were steady now. I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt in months, maybe years, like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy and had finally set it down. "I already did," I said. "The papers were filed yesterday. You have 60 days. I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Emily's sobs, loud and desperate. David's voice saying something I couldn't make out, but I kept walking. I stopped at the stairs and looked back one last time. "By the way," I said, "I'll be staying in a hotel tonight. You wanted your privacy. Now you have it." As I climbed the stairs to get my suitcase, I heard Emily collapse into her chair, her crying echoing through that beautiful house, the house I'd helped save, the house that had never been in danger at all. And for the first time in my life, I walked away from my daughter's tears without turning back. I drove to a Holiday Inn 20 minutes away. My hands didn't shake on the steering wheel. My vision didn't blur with tears. I felt nothing at all, and that scared me more than the crying would have. The hotel room was generic, beige walls, floral bedspread, the smell of industrial cleaning products trying to mask decades of other people's lives. I set my suitcase on the bed and sat down beside it. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red. 10:47 p.m. For a long time, I just sat there in the dark, staring at nothing. Then I opened my suitcase and pulled out my recipe book. The cover was more torn now than it had been when Emily first discovered it all those years ago. I'd repaired it with tape so many times that the spine was more adhesive than fabric, but it was still whole, still mine. I opened it to the first page. My mother's handwriting greeted me, careful, looping cursive that belonged to a generation that believed penmanship mattered. Her chicken casserole recipe, the one I'd made for Emily 1,000 times. The one she used to say tasted like home. And that's when it hit me. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once like a wave crashing over my head. My daughter didn't just lie to me about money. She lied about who she was. The Emily I thought I knew, the girl who cried when I worked overtime on her birthday, the teenager who wrote me thank you notes for every sacrifice, the young woman who called me her hero. That person never existed. Or maybe she had existed once, but somewhere along the way, she'd disappeared, and I'd been too busy trying to be a good mother to notice. I thought about all the years I'd worked double shifts, the nights I came home so tired I could barely stand, but I still made dinner because I wanted her to have homemade meals. The birthdays I celebrated alone because I was saving money for her college fund. The dates I turned down because I didn't want to bring a man into her life unless I was sure he'd stay. I'd built my entire existence around making sure she never felt the absence of her father. I wanted her to know that even though he left, she was still loved completely, loved enough for two parents. I thought, if I just sacrificed enough, if I just gave enough, she'd grow up understanding what real love looked like. But I'd taught her something else instead. I'd taught her that my love had no boundaries, no limits, no price tag. I'd taught her that no matter what she did, I would always catch her when she fell. I'd taught her that she could take and take and take, and I would never stop giving. And she'd learned the lesson perfectly. I thought about the envelope she'd given me, the $200 for bus fare, the coldness in her voice when she told me to leave, as if I was some house guest who'd overstayed her welcome, not the woman who'd given birth to her, raised her, sacrificed everything so she could have a better life. The worst part, the part that made my chest ache like something inside me was dying, was that she'd planned it. She'd called me 3 weeks ago with that sweet voice, telling me she missed me, asking me to visit. And all along, she'd been planning to kick me out. She'd bought the expensive food, set the fancy table, lit the candles, all so she could deliver her rejection in style. It was a performance, and I'd been the only one who didn't know I was part of the show. I picked up my phone. 3 missed calls from Emily. 7 text messages. I opened them. "Mom, please call me Mom. I'm sorry. Please, just let me explain. I didn't mean any of it. I swear. We can work this out. Please don't do this. Mom, please, you're scaring me. I love you. Please answer, Mom." Please, I stared at those words. I love you. How many times had I said those words to her? How many times had she said them back? And what did they even mean anymore? Love isn't supposed to lie. Love isn't supposed to manipulate. Love isn't supposed to look at your mother's tired face and see a bank account instead of a person. I thought about calling her back. My fingers hovered over her name in my contacts. She was still my daughter. Still the baby I'd rocked to sleep every night for 2 years because she had colic and couldn't settle. Still the toddler who used to grab my face with her small hands and say, "Mommy pretty." Still the child who'd needed me more than anything in the world. But she didn't need me anymore. She wanted my money, and when she got it, she wanted me gone. I put the phone down. A mother's love is supposed to be unconditional. That's what everyone says. A mother loves her child no matter what. No matter the mistakes, no matter the pain, no matter the betrayal. A mother's love is eternal and infinite and unbreakable. But what about the mother? What about her heart? I stood up and walked to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror under the harsh fluorescent light. 56 years old. Lines around my eyes from 30 years of night shifts and worry. Gray streaks in my hair that I'd stopped covering up because hair dye was expensive and Emily needed college money. Hands that were rough and scarred from decades of work. This was the woman my daughter had thrown away like garbage. I thought about the legal papers I'd filed. Emily had 60 days to repay almost $30,000. She didn't have it. I knew she didn't have it. That tennis bracelet, that furniture, that vacation. She'd spent my money as fast as I'd sent it. She'd have to sell things, maybe even borrow from David's parents. She'd have to face consequences for the first time in her privileged life. And some part of me, the part that had been buried under years of unconditional love and selfless sacrifice, felt satisfied, not happy, not joyful, but satisfied in a cold, hard way that I'd never felt before. My phone rang. Emily again. I silenced it. I climbed into the hotel bed with my recipe book and opened it to a random page. Blueberry pie. Emily's favorite. I'd made it for every birthday until she turned 23 and decided she wanted something from a fancy bakery instead. I remember feeling hurt, but telling myself she was just growing up, developing her own tastes. Now I wondered how many other times I'd explained away her cruelty as maturity. I closed the book and held it against my chest. This was all I had left of my mother. All I had left of the years when love meant something simple and true. Before it got complicated with money and expectations and disappointment so deep, they felt like drowning. The clock glowed. 12:13 a.m. Somewhere across town, my daughter was probably still crying. David was probably trying to figure out how to fix this. They were probably looking at their bank accounts, calculating how much they could scrape together, panicking about the legal papers. I still wonder if I did the right thing. What about you? What would you have done in my place? And me? I was lying in a hotel room, holding a recipe book and wondering when exactly I'd stopped being someone's mother and started being someone's ATM. But tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow I would figure out who I was when I wasn't giving everything away. Tomorrow, I would learn to be Regina Hayes, not Emily's mother, not the woman who sacrificed everything, just Regina. Whoever she was underneath all those years of being used. I turned off the light and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come for a long, long time. 3 days later, Emily showed up at my apartment. I'd driven home the morning after that dinner. 3 hours of highway with nothing but silence and the radio playing songs I didn't hear. When I walked into my small apartment, 1 bedroom, kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, furniture I'd owned for 15 years, it felt different. Smaller than I remembered, but also somehow more mine. I'd unpacked my suitcase, put my recipe book back on its shelf, and made myself a cup of tea. Then I'd sat at my kitchen table and cried for 2 hours straight. Not quiet tears, deep, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere so far down inside me, I didn't know that place existed. I cried for the daughter I thought I had. I cried for the years I'd wasted believing love was the same as sacrifice. I cried for the woman I'd been, naive, exhausted, endlessly giving, and the woman I'd become in that hotel room, someone harder and colder and infinitely more alone. But when the crying stopped, I felt something else, something I hadn't felt in 30 years. I felt free. On the 3rd day, I was making lunch, nothing fancy, just a grilled cheese sandwich, when I heard the knock, loud, insistent, desperate. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Emily stood in my hallway looking like she hadn't slept. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup. She was wearing jeans and an old sweatshirt I'd bought her 5 Christmases ago. In her hands, she clutched a folder. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking on the word, "please, I need to talk to you." I should have felt something. Pity, maybe. Or maternal instinct kicking in. That automatic urge to pull her into my arms and tell her everything would be okay. But I felt nothing. Just a strange, distant curiosity, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. "Come in," I said quietly. She followed me inside, and I saw her looking around my apartment like she was seeing it for the first time. The worn couch I'd bought secondhand when she was in middle school. The small TV on a stand I'd assembled myself. The kitchen table with the wobbly leg I'd never gotten around to fixing because I was always too tired after work. This was where I lived. This was what was left after I'd given her everything. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch. She sat. I took the chair across from her, the one with the cushion that was flat from years of use. We looked at each other across that small distance, and it felt like a canyon. "I brought this," Emily said, opening the folder with shaking hands. "It's a payment plan. I talked to a financial advisor. If I sell my car and downgrade to something used, if we cancel our streaming services and cut back on everything, I can pay you $2,000 a month. It'll take 13 months, but I can do it. I can pay you back everything, including the interest you'll have to pay on the loan." She pushed the papers toward me. I didn't touch them. "Emily," I said slowly, "do you know why I filed those papers?" She looked up at me, confused. "Because I lied to you. Because I hurt you. Because I deserve to be punished." "No." I shook my head. "That's not why." Tears started streaming down her face. "Then why, Mom? Why are you doing this to me?" "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm showing you what you did to me." She sobbed, that ugly crying that happens when you're trying to hold it in but can't. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I lied. I know I was selfish and cruel. But I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything?" And there it was, the question I'd been asking myself for 3 days. "It used to," I said softly. "It used to mean everything. But you taught me something, Emily. You taught me that being someone's mother doesn't make me immune to being hurt. It doesn't mean I have to accept being used and discarded. It doesn't mean I have to keep giving until there's nothing left of me but bones." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't pay my bills. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I spent working myself to exhaustion for you. Sorry doesn't erase the way you looked at me when you handed me that envelope with bus fare, like I was some stranger you couldn't wait to get rid of." Emily buried her face in her hands. Her whole body shook with crying, and I sat there, watching her fall apart, feeling absolutely nothing. That's when I knew I'd lost her. Not because she'd betrayed me, not because she'd lied, but because something inside me had finally broken so completely that it couldn't be repaired. That invisible cord between mother and child, the one that's supposed to be unbreakable, it had snapped. "I don't want your payment plan," I said quietly. She looked up, hope flickering in her swollen eyes. "You don't?" "No. I want you to pay me back because the law says you have to. I want you to struggle. I want you to sell your car and cancel your subscriptions and feel what it's like to go without things you want because you made choices that hurt someone who loved you. I want you to learn the lesson I should have taught you years ago." "What lesson?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "That love isn't infinite. That eventually, even a mother's heart can run dry." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Emily stood up slowly, leaving the folder on my coffee table. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. Maybe I was a stranger to myself now, too. "I'll pay you back," she said, her voice hollow. "Every penny. And then what?" I thought about the recipe book on my shelf, the one I'd wanted to pass down to her someday, along with all the stories and love it contained. I thought about Sunday dinners and birthday cakes, and all the ways I'd tried to tell her she was loved. "And then," I said, "you'll know what it cost me to love you. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll learn to be grateful for the people who sacrifice for you instead of treating them like they're disposable." She walked to the door, her steps slow and heavy. When she reached it, she turned back one last time. "Do you still love me?" she asked, and she sounded like a little girl again, scared and small and desperate for reassurance. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and I told her the truth. "I don't know anymore." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Then she opened the door and walked out of my apartment, leaving that folder behind like an apology I didn't want. I sat there for a long time after she left. The grilled cheese sandwich I'd been making was cold now, forgotten on the stove. Outside my window, I could hear children playing in the courtyard, their laughter bright and innocent. I picked up the folder Emily had left. Inside was a detailed payment plan, printed on nice paper with color-coded charts. She'd put effort into it. Time, thought, maybe even love, in whatever broken way she understood love now. I walked to my small desk and filed it away in a drawer, not because I was going to accept her payment plan, but because someday, maybe years from now, I might want to remember that she tried, even if it was too late. The thing about losing a child is that they don't have to die for you to grieve them. Sometimes they just become someone you don't recognize, someone who looks like the baby you held, sounds like the toddler who called you mommy, but isn't that person anymore. They've transformed into someone who can look you in the eye and break your heart without hesitation. I'd lost my daughter that night at her dinner table, but today, sitting in my quiet apartment, I finally accepted it. And somehow, that acceptance felt like the beginning of something new. Not happiness, not yet, but something close to peace. 6 months passed. I went back to work, picked up extra shifts when I could, and started paying down that loan. $204 every month, like clockwork. It hurt. Some weeks I ate ramen and crackers. Some months I had to choose between new shoes and heating. But I paid it. Because it was mine to pay. And I'd learned something important. You can't control what people take from you, but you can control what you do about it. Emily paid too. The court ordered her to make monthly payments, $1,500, every month for 18 months. I didn't ask how she got the money. I didn't call to check on her. I'd blocked her number after that day in my apartment, and I kept it blocked. But word travels in families, even broken ones. David's mother, a kind woman who'd always treated me with respect, called me one afternoon in early spring. "Regina," she said gently, "I thought you should know. Emily and David are separating." I was folding laundry when she called. I stood there with one of my work scrubs in my hands, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, just quiet acknowledgement. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "The money troubles were too much," she continued. "David couldn't handle the stress. And Emily, well, she's changed. She's angry all the time, bitter. She blames everyone but herself. After we hung up, I sat on my couch and thought about karma. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, where bad people get struck by lightning or lose everything in one devastating moment. Real karma is quieter than that. It's the slow erosion of a life built on lies. It's loneliness that comes from pushing away everyone who loved you. It's looking in the mirror and seeing someone you don't recognize. Emily had called me crazy once. Years ago, during an argument I'd almost forgotten. I'd suggested she budget better, and she'd snapped, "You're being crazy, Mom. I'm fine. Stop worrying so much." Now I heard through David's mother that Emily was going to therapy twice a week, struggling with anxiety, unable to sleep. She'd lost weight, lost friends who got tired of her complaints, lost the husband who'd stood beside her through everything until he simply couldn't anymore. Life was keeping its score, not because I wished it upon her, not because I'd cursed her or sought revenge, but because that's what happens when you treat people like they're disposable. Eventually, you end up alone, surrounded by all the things you bought with borrowed love. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad in a distant way, like hearing about a stranger's misfortune. One evening in late June, I was watering the small herb garden I'd started on my apartment balcony. Basil, rosemary, thyme. When I saw something that made me pause. A young woman in the courtyard below, maybe 25, laughing with a little girl who looked about 7. The woman picked up the child and spun her around, and their joy rose up like music. I thought, that used to be us. And then I thought, but it wasn't real. Or maybe it was real then. But people change. Love changes. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is accept that some relationships aren't meant to survive. I went back inside and pulled out my recipe book. I hadn't opened it since that night at the hotel. But now I flipped through the pages, reading my mother's notes, my grandmother's corrections in the margins, my own additions over the years. This book had survived 3 generations of women. It would survive this too. Maybe someday I'd pass it to someone. Maybe not Emily. Maybe a niece or a young nurse at work who reminded me of myself. Or maybe I'd just keep it until I died and let someone find it and wonder about the woman who'd collected all these recipes like prayers. The important thing was this. I'd kept it. I'd kept myself. I'd learned that you can love someone completely and still walk away when they break you. You can be a good mother and still say no. You can sacrifice everything and still deserve to be treated with respect. Emily had taught me what I was worth. And ironically, it was the cruelest gift she'd ever given me. Life was keeping its score, and I was finally learning to keep mine. It's been 2 years since that dinner. 2 years since I learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's surrender. My name is Regina Hayes. I'm 58 years old now, and I want to tell you what I've learned from the daughter who broke my heart, and in breaking it, set me free. The loan is almost paid off. 18 more months. And it'll be behind me. Emily finished her court-ordered payments last spring. She sent the final check with a note that said, "I'm sorry for everything." I cashed the check. I didn't respond to the note. Some apologies come too late to change anything, but that doesn't mean you can't accept the money. I still work at the hospital, still pull night shifts when they need me. But I've learned to say no sometimes. Last month, they asked me to work Thanksgiving, and I said no. I spent the day alone, made myself a small turkey breast using my grandmother's recipe from the book, and I felt grateful, not lonely, grateful. That's the thing about rebuilding yourself after someone tears you down. You discover you're actually quite good company. I made a new friend at work, a woman named Patricia who's 63 and training for a half marathon. She invited me to join her walking group. Every Saturday morning, 6 women meet at the park and walk for an hour, talking about everything and nothing. Last week, one of them was crying about her adult son who only calls when he needs money. The other women offered advice, shared their own stories, and I stayed quiet until Patricia looked at me and asked, "Regina, what do you think?" I told them a shorter version of my story. Not the whole thing. Some wounds are too private to share with near strangers. But enough. Enough that they understood. When I finished, the crying woman looked at me and said, "Did you ever forgive her?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "No," I said finally, "but I forgave myself for being too trusting, for confusing sacrifice with love, for believing that giving everything meant I was being a good mother, when really I was teaching her that my needs didn't matter. The woman nodded slowly. That's harder, isn't it? Forgiving yourself? Yes, I said. But it's also more important. I haven't spoken to Emily in all this time. I heard through David's mother, who still calls me every few months, that Emily got remarried last fall. A man she met at her therapy group. I hope he makes her happy. I hope she learned something from losing David, from losing me, from losing the version of herself she thought she could be. But mostly, I've stopped hoping anything for her. Not out of cruelty, out of acceptance. My recipe book sits on my kitchen counter now instead of hidden on a shelf. I use it almost every week. Sometimes I make dishes for myself. Sometimes I make extra and bring it to work for the younger nurses who survive on vending machine food and energy drinks. Last month, one of them, a sweet girl named Maya, who's 24, asked if I could teach her how to make my chicken casserole. We spent a Saturday afternoon in my small kitchen, her hands clumsy with the measuring cups, her laughter bright when she spilled flour on her shirt. And I realized something. This was what I'd wanted to do with Emily. Pass down not just recipes, but time, attention. The kind of love that shows up in small moments and doesn't demand anything in return. My mom never taught me to cook, Maya said quietly as we waited for the casserole to bake. She was always too busy, or too tired. Or maybe she just didn't think it mattered. It matters, I told her. Not the food, the time. Someone caring enough to show you how to do something with their own hands. She hugged me when she left, the casserole wrapped carefully in foil. Thank you, Regina. This meant a lot. And I thought, this is what I have to give now. Not to a daughter who took everything, but to young women who remind me why I became a nurse in the first place, to care for people, to show up, to make someone's day a little bit better. Some people ask me if I regret filing those legal papers, if I regret being so harsh with Emily. The truth is complicated. I regret that it came to that. I regret that my daughter became someone who could look at my love and see only a resource to exploit. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret teaching her that actions have consequences, even when the person you hurt is your mother. Last week, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I was organizing my closet and found that white envelope, the one Emily had given me with $200 for bus fare. I'd kept it all this time without really knowing why. I stood there holding it, and instead of anger, I felt something softer. Pity, maybe. Or just sadness for the girl she used to be before whatever happened to her heart happened. I threw the envelope away, not dramatically, just put it in the trash with the old receipts and junk mail, because some things don't deserve to be kept as reminders. Some things are better left behind. If my story helps one woman open her eyes, if it helps one mother understand that loving your child doesn't mean letting them destroy you, then everything I went through was worth it. If one person reads this and realizes they deserve better than being used by someone they love, then my pain had purpose. I'm 58 years old. I work hard. I have friends. I have my small apartment with the herb garden on the balcony and the recipe book in the kitchen. I have Saturday morning walks and quiet Sundays and the knowledge that I survived something that almost broke me. My daughter taught me that you can love someone with your whole heart and still lose them. But she also taught me something more important. You can lose someone and still find yourself. And finding yourself, learning who you are when you're not giving everything away, that's the real gift, even if it came wrapped in pain. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on the bell to hear more stories of women who turned pain into wisdom. Every day, one woman, one life lesson. Share this story with someone you love. Sometimes one story can change an entire day. God bless you and see you next time.